A millionaire, in absolute despair, walks the streets with $100 in his hand and meets a starving girl begging for money. "Please, pretend to be my daughter for a few hours," he begs. The child, terrified but desperate, agrees. Yet when she discovers the reason, she is left in shock. The aroma of expensive coffee mingled with the cold sweat of desperation in Liam Miller's sleek penthouse, a mansion in the sky that served as a silent testament to his colossal fortune, amassed through savvy investments and a mastery of the stock market. Every piece of art, every imported piece of furniture screamed success, but none of it echoed the peace he so desperately pretended to possess. He was just an hour away from a crucial meeting, the most important of his career, and the house of cards he had built on a foundation of lies was threatening to collapse. Liam, in his 30s, was a man whose obsession with social status was the driving force behind his business empire, a vast net worth that seemed endless. He was the personification of success, a multi-millionaire many envied, but few truly knew the loneliness that gnawed at his soul. The flawless image he projected was armor against the emotional vulnerability that only surfaced when he was confronted with situations beyond his control. Like now, his boundless ambition had propelled him to build a business empire, making his capital grow exponentially, but it had also isolated him from any genuine human connection. Liam's main internal conflict revolved around the desperate need to maintain an image of a successful and socially complete man, while dealing with the profound loneliness of having no real family and the corrosive fear of being exposed as an emotional fraud. With every news report about his profits or the profitability of his funds, a greater void seemed to open in his chest. Weeks earlier, during a casual corporate dinner, Liam had let a casual lie slip to the company's global CEO, a man of immense influence and respect. He had mentioned, with a forced nonchalance, that he had a young daughter. At the moment, it seemed like a harmless social lie, a ploy to better fit in with the married executives who dominated the corporate environment. Men whose family lives seemed as complete as their bank accounts stuffed with dollars. He wanted to be seen as a man who had everything, not just immense cash flow. The first minor twist, a chilling shock that awakened him to the reality of his recklessness, struck like lightning from a clear blue sky when the CEO, with a warm smile, announced a special promotion ceremony. All candidates for managing partner were required to attend with their families, including spouses and children. What had been an insignificant lie to polish his image suddenly morphed into a real and imminent threat to his career, to the very fortune he had worked so hard to accumulate. The fear of losing his position, his treasure trove of assets, was paralyzing. The second minor twist came from his girlfriend, Valerie, an ambitious woman whose appreciation for status was as great as his own. She panicked upon discovering the gravity of the lie. With an icy glare and sharp words, she not only refused to pretend to be a mother, but threatened to end the relationship if he didn't resolve the situation immediately. "This is a risk I can't afford to take, Liam," she had said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. For her, the risk of being associated with a sham was greater than all the money he possessed. The third minor twist manifested cruelly when every child-casting agency, one after another, delivered the same disheartening verdict. There wasn't enough time to hire a professional child actress with the necessary documentation for the high-security corporate event. The deadlines, the protocols, the red tape, everything conspired against him. No amount of Bitcoin or crypto he could offer could speed up the process. It was a dead end, and Liam felt real panic tighten its grip on his chest. During the first week, the week of silent desperation, Liam wandered the streets, his mind in a whirlwind, searching for a solution that seemed increasingly unattainable. He walked aimlessly, his eyes scanning every face in the crowd, searching for an answer, a miracle, anything that could save his corporate ascent and, In a way, his very identity. The feeling that everything he had built, his net worth, his image, his life, was about to crumble, consumed him. He had money, a fortune in gold and dividends, but he didn't have what he truly needed, a family. Liam felt the weight of his loneliness like never before, a loneliness that not even his assets and income could fill. The street, with its brutal indifference, seemed to mock his anguish. The clock was ticking. The ceremony loomed relentlessly, and he was losing control. A void, an abyss of despair, opened beneath his feet. He needed a solution, and he needed it now. His eyes, once fixed on profitability charts and profit projections, now scanned the sidewalks in search of something unimaginable. What would he do? He had no idea, but he knew that time was running out. He would do anything. The hot asphalt seemed to vibrate under Liam's expensive shoes, each step echoing the urgency consuming him. The merciless midday sun bathed the bustling downtown streets, a scene of stark contrast to the opulence of his penthouse. Millions in cash, accumulated through years of astute investments and an almost supernatural understanding of the stock market, lay inert in his accounts, unable to buy what he needed most at that moment: a daughter. His net worth, which included valuable real estate and vast capital in high-yield funds, seemed a useless burden in his situation. He was desperate, and desperation is a cruel equalizer, reducing billionaires to ordinary men in search of salvation. His eyes, accustomed to analyzing complex reports and cash flow charts, now fixed on every face, every street corner, in a frenzy of searching. The promise of a promotion to managing partner, representing the coronation of his obsession with social status, was about to evaporate. He couldn't let that happen. Not after everything he had built, all the profit he had generated, all the gold he had invested, his reputation, his legacy, his future. It all depended on solving this puzzle in less than 48 hours. A slight tremor ran through his body as he thought of the humiliation of being exposed. It was then that his eyes fixed on a tiny figure, almost invisible amid the city's hustle and bustle. Near the gleaming facade of one of the corporate buildings neighboring his office, where he kept a large portion of his assets, sat a little girl. She must have been about 7, maybe 8, with her knees drawn up, and a look that seemed to carry the weight of many seasons. Her hair, tangled and dull, framed a small but expressive face marked by dirt and pallor. The worn, though clean, clothes hung on her thin frame as if borrowed from someone much larger. She held out a small, grimy hand to passers-by, murmuring something inaudible, but her hungry eyes said it all. Liam felt a strange tug in his chest, something that was neither pity nor revulsion, but an uncomfortable mix of both, seasoned with the spark of an audacious idea. The girl was visibly helpless, and Liam's desperation was so great that logic seemed to have given way to a primitive survival instinct. He, a man who controlled astronomical figures in dollars, who amassed wealth in crypto and had investments all over the world, was about to make an unimaginable proposal to a street child. The contrast was brutal, almost surreal. He approached slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. The girl looked up, her brown, alert eyes fixing on him with an intensity that surprised him. There was no naivety there, only a quiet vigilance, a precocious wisdom that didn't match her age. Liam hesitated for a moment. The words caught in his throat. How could he, a businessman accustomed to high-stakes negotiations over interest rates and dividends, explain his request to a child? How could he dare ask a homeless girl to join his charade? "Hello?" he began, his voice a bit hoarse. The girl didn't answer, just watched him, her eyes narrowed as if trying to decipher his intentions. Liam cleared his throat, feeling cold sweat trickle down his neck. I need some help." He held out his hand, not with money, but in a gesture he hoped would be one of friendship. She recoiled slightly, like a shadow moving away from the light. He pulled his hand back, feeling a flush creep up his cheeks. The ensuing silence was heavy, laden with the tension of this unlikely encounter. Liam took a deep breath, casting aside all his pride and his image. "I'll give you $100, he said, the words coming out abruptly, directly, like a businessman with no time for pleasantries. "To pretend to be my daughter for a few hours." He watched her reaction, expecting a laugh, a shout, anything. But the girl just stared at him, her brown eyes showing not a shred of surprise, as if she had already seen it all. Her expression, despite her young age, was one of disturbing seriousness, and Liam felt a chill run down his spine. Her mind seemed to be working quickly, processing the offer, weighing the risks. He had expected a thank you and an immediate acceptance, but what came next was something he could never have predicted. The girl didn't move, her brown eyes fixed on Liam with an intensity that disarmed the businessman accustomed to dealing with the shrewdest traders on Wall Street. $100. To Liam, it was a trivial sum, pocket change that wouldn't make a dent in his colossal net worth, a mere detail in his working capital. For her, however, it was a fortune, a treasure that could mean days, perhaps weeks, of safety and food, something all the gold or Bitcoin in the world couldn't buy for her right now. But the hunger in her eyes wasn't the only thing he saw. There was a sharp intelligence, an unshakable mistrust. $100. Her voice was thin, but surprisingly firm, a thread of sound that cut through the city's noise. "Is that all?" Liam blinked, stunned. This was not the reaction he expected from a homeless child. He had thought the offer would be an instant passport to cooperation, that the money, his wealth, would be irresistible. He had money stashed in investment funds, high-yield applications that paid considerable dividends, and she seemed unimpressed. Yes, he stammered, feeling somewhat infantilized by his lack of tact. "For a few hours. For you to go somewhere with me and pretend to be my daughter." He tried to sound convincing, but with every word, the lie seemed to become more grotesque. The girl tilted her head, her tangled hair falling across her face. She wasn't a professional actress, but the way she analyzed him was almost like one, "I'll do it," she said, and a sudden wave of relief washed over Liam, nearly knocking him over. But her next sentence made him hold his breath. But I have conditions." Conditions. A homeless child was imposing conditions on a multi-millionaire, a man whose name was synonymous with profit and success in business. It was absurd, but the situation was so bizarre that he couldn't afford to refuse. He, who managed his net worth with the rigidity of a CEO, was being negotiated with by a little girl. "Conditions," he repeated, his voice laced with an incredulity he tried to hide. "Yes," she replied, her brown eyes steady. "First, you promise not to hurt me in any way." Liam's stomach churned. That sentence, spoken with such profound seriousness, revealed a universe of traumatic experiences he couldn't even begin to imagine. Her words were a wall between them, built of fear and memories of abandonment. "I promise," he said, feeling a lump in his throat. His promise to her was a contract for survival. For him, it was a promise he had no choice but to keep. He who dealt with million-dollar contracts and intricate clauses was now bound by a promise made to a child. "And second," she continued, "I get paid up front." She held out her hand again, this time not to beg, but to demand. The confidence in her eyes, the way she looked at him directly, without hesitation, betrayed a disturbing maturity, a resilience forged on the streets, in a world where the promise of dividends and profitability didn't exist. Only the immediate guarantee of survival. She wouldn't take his credit, not with his money, not with his fortune. Liam took out his leather wallet, where he kept hundreds of dollars, tangible proof of his wealth, and pulled out two $50 bills. As he handed them over, his fingers brushed against hers. The girl's skin was rough, calloused, a stark contrast to the softness of Liam's hands. accustomed to designer pens and keyboards that managed vast investments. She took the money, folded it carefully, and tucked it into a secret pocket inside her clothes. A movement that denoted practice and caution, as if it were a small treasure of gold. "What's your name?" Liam asked, feeling a strange warmth spread through his chest, something beyond the desperation for his promotion. "Isadora," she replied, and the name floated in the air, simple and direct, like her. "And yours?" "Liam," he said. "Liam Miller?" The girl just nodded, as if the name meant nothing to her beyond a formality. The chasm between their worlds was vast, but for a few hours they would be connected by a charade. Little did Liam know that the deal he had made with Isadora, driven by his ambition and fear of losing his position, was the first step on a journey that would lead him to discover a kind of wealth that no amount of capital, however vast, could ever buy. He was heading down an unknown path, and Isadora, the girl from the street, would be his guide. The charade was about to begin, but what it would truly reveal would be far more profound than he imagined. He glanced at his watch. Time was running out, and a sense of vertigo overwhelmed him. What was he doing? Liam watched Isadora as she followed his steps, a tiny shadow in his life of grandeur. He took her to a coffee shop a few blocks away, a discreet place where the street noises dissolved into a muted hum of conversation and the clinking of cups. He ordered a hot chocolate for her and a coffee for himself, but Liam's stomach was in knots, not from hunger, but from the strange mixture of relief and dread. He had secured a daughter for his charade, but the reality of the situation was beginning to weigh on his shoulders. His fortune in dollars, his vast net worth built on years of business profit, could not have prepared him for the complexity of this encounter. He watched her take small sips of the hot chocolate, her eyes wide with wonder, as if it were the greatest treasure she had ever tasted. The scene touched something in Liam, an emotion he barely recognized, obscured by his ambition and the relentless pursuit of more money, more capital, more status. He felt like a stranger in his own life, someone who had lost the ability to appreciate the small things, focused only on interest rates, dividends, and the profitability of his investments. "We need to talk about the meeting," Liam began, trying to sound as gentle as possible. He found himself on unfamiliar ground, far different from negotiating stocks on the market. Isadora nodded, a hot chocolate mustache on her upper lip, but her gaze remained serious, almost analytical. "What do I have to do?" "You need to be my daughter," he explained, feeling a flush on his cheeks. "For a few hours, you'll call me Dad, and I'll introduce you to some important people. You just need to smile and look happy. You don't have to talk much." He tried to simplify it, but the artificiality of it all bothered him deeply. "I get it," she said, and there was a hint of melancholy in her voice that he couldn't ignore. Liam noticed the scars on her hands, small marks that told stories of hardship and struggle. He, a man who had never wanted for anything, who possessed assets in abundance, felt an inexplicable unease. This girl, with her fragile appearance, was impressively resilient. "Where do you live, Isadora?" he asked suddenly, driven by a curiosity that surprised him. It wasn't a question for the charade. It was a genuine question, coming from a place inside him he barely knew existed. Her eyes drifted to the window, where the city's chaos continued unabated. "On the streets," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For a few months now," Liam swallowed hard. "On the streets. Why?" He felt a tightness in his chest, something that went beyond concern for his image. She hesitated, biting her lower lip. "I ran away from a group home." Her voice was barely a whisper, and with each word, the story became more painful. They weren't good there. Nobody cared. I preferred the street. Neglect, loneliness, abandonment. Liam, who had accumulated incalculable wealth, who lived in a mansion with every possible comfort, couldn't imagine such a reality. The contrast between her life and the opulence of his funds and high-yield investments was jarring. A chill ran down Liam's spine. A group home, neglect, stocks, investments in gold, crypto. None of it mattered now. Isadora's story resonated strangely in his core, awakening paternal feelings he didn't know he possessed, an empathy he had buried under layers of ambition and corporate coldness. He had always thought success was measured in money, in net worth, in capital, but her gaze made him question everything. He took her to a luxury children's clothing store. The idea was that she would need a wardrobe befitting the role of a millionaire's daughter. As she tried on expensive dresses, Liam watched her in the mirror. She twirled, her eyes shining with a childish joy he hadn't seen before. For a moment, the charade felt almost real, and Liam felt a comforting warmth spread through his chest. He bought her a doll, too, a strange impulse, something he would never have imagined doing. But her innocence was fragile, and the shadows of the past stubbornly returned. Liam realized that behind the brave facade, Isadora was a traumatized child. One moment, she would trust him, laughing at the jokes he tried to tell about how dads and daughters behaved. The next, a distant look would take over her eyes, and she would pull away, seeming ready to flee at any loud noise or sudden movement, like a startled animal, always on alert. Her fear of abandonment was palpable, and he saw it in her gestures, in the way she flinched slightly when he got too close. It was an invisible but real obstacle in building this charade. While Liam struggled to prepare her for the big day, the outside world seemed to conspire against him. His colleagues, driven by a quiet envy and the promise of that promotion, began to investigate his sudden family. They couldn't accept that Liam, the inveterate bachelor, would suddenly appear with a daughter. Rumors began to circulate, whispers about a possible sham. Liam felt the weight of their stares, the suspicion in every unspoken word. He knew some of them had hired private investigators, looking for evidence of fraud, anything that could undermine his reputation and his chance to reach the pinnacle of his career. The charade was becoming more complex, more dangerous than he had imagined. He looked at Isadora, who was now sleeping peacefully in the back of his car. The week that followed was a whirlwind of improvised lessons on how to be a daughter in Liam's world. He took her to his penthouse, a luxurious oasis where each piece of art was worth more than most people's annual salary. There, he tried to teach her how to walk, talk, and gesture like a child from his family. Liam, who had mastered the intricacies of stock investments and the volatility of the market, felt like a complete amateur in the art of shaping a child's spontaneity. He wanted her to seem natural, but Isadora's naturalness came from such a different place than his that the task proved almost impossible. The apartment, filled with assets that denoted his vast net worth, felt like a golden cage to the girl accustomed to the freedom of the streets. He showed her pictures of families in high-end magazines, pointing to forced smiles and perfect poses. See, Isadora, this is how a daughter behaves, with affection. You need to snuggle up. Laugh at my jokes, even if they're not funny. Isadora watched him with her brown eyes, absorbing the information like a sponge, but a glint of skepticism never left her. To her, this world of wealth, of capital and profits in dollars, was a stage, and she was the reluctant actress. The truth of her life on the streets, the traumatic experiences of neglect, was a chasm between what he asked and what she could genuinely offer. One of the biggest difficulties was Isadora's fluctuating trust. In moments of ease, when Liam distracted her with stories about how the universe worked or took her to an ice cream parlor, small luxuries he barely noticed but which were like treasures to her, Isadora would loosen up. A genuine smile would bloom on her face, and she would call him Dad, with a sweetness that made Liam's heart soften in a strange way, warming something inside him that capital and ambition had never touched. But all it took was a sterner look from Liam, a sudden movement, or a question about her life on the streets, for her to retreat, her eyes taking on that wary, cornered animal vigilance. "You promise you won't leave me?" she asked one day, out of the blue, as they watched a cartoon on his massive home theater screen. The question caught him off guard. He, who had abandoned so many things in his pursuit of money and power, who traded investments and funds without hesitation, felt a deep unease. "Of course not, Isadora," he replied, his voice sounding firmer than he felt. "I won't leave you." But the words felt hollow even to him. He was lying to everyone, including her. He was using her, and guilt began to eat away at the veneer of his self-confidence. He had an enviable net worth, substantial dividends, and a life of luxury. But the loneliness Isadora expressed was the same loneliness he felt. While Liam struggled to teach her how to act like a daughter, the external pressure mounted. The rumors at the office grew stronger. His most envious colleagues, those he had outperformed in profitability and cash flow, were thirsty for any slip-up that could bring him down. Liam received anonymous emails with subtle questions about the new addition to the Miller family, or silent phone calls that made him feel watched. One day, leaving his building, he noticed a dark car parked at a distance, with someone inside who seemed to be observing him. Private investigators, he assumed. His business empire, built on a solid foundation of gold and Bitcoin, now seemed threatened by a charade as fragile as a child's trust. This surveillance made him more paranoid, more impatient with Isadora, which in turn made her withdraw even more. It was a vicious cycle of mistrust and fear. He needed her to be perfect for the approaching ceremony, but every rehearsal attempt ended with Liam frustrated and Isadora cornered. The anxiety was a weight on the multimillionaire's chest, a threat to his future, to his chance of achieving the billionaire status he so craved. At the end of the second week, with the promotion ceremony just 2 days away, Liam felt he was losing control. The charade seemed on the verge of collapse. He had brought Isadora to his penthouse for one last rehearsal, a simulated family dinner. But in the middle of the dinner, Isadora, overwhelmed by fear and artificiality, had a sudden panic attack. She huddled under the table, trembling, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't want to play anymore, Daddy. I don't want to," she cried. Her small voice choked with tears. Liam tried to reach her, but she pushed him away, her small arms flailing. The scene shocked him. He pulled her out from her hiding spot and held her, feeling her tiny body tremble in his arms. In that moment, he wasn't the ambitious executive, the capital magnate, but just a desperate man holding a terrified child. He glanced at the clock. Time was running out. The ceremony was coming, and he wasn't sure if Isadora, or he himself, could withstand the pressure. The charade was on the edge, and a single mistake could destroy not only his career, but also the fragile connection he was barely aware was growing between them. The day of the ceremony dawned with a pale light, a melancholic contrast to the hurricane of emotions churning in Liam's chest. He woke up early, his eyes heavy from insomnia, the weight of the charade and the impending event crushing him. Isadora, on the other hand, was sleeping soundly in one of the penthouse's guest rooms, exhausted from the previous night and the intensity of the rehearsals. When Liam woke her, she still seemed sleepy, but a flicker of fear danced in her brown eyes. Liam, a man used to managing his vast net worth and investments with calculated coolness, felt strangely inept at handling the fragility of this little girl. The luxury around them, with its crystal chandeliers and priceless works of art, seemed to mock the simplicity and innocence he was trying to protect. "Good morning, Isadora," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Today's the big day. Are you ready?" She nodded, her lips pressed together. "I'll be your daughter, Dad, I promised." The memory of his promise not to abandon her echoed in Liam's mind, an uncomfortable reminder of the web of lies he was tangled in. He helped her into a silk dress he had bought at the city's most exclusive boutique, a child's model that cost the equivalent of several months' rent in less fortunate neighborhoods. In the mirror, Isadora looked like a princess, but her eyes still carried the melancholy of a child who had seen too much. On the way to the event, held in a sumptuous ballroom at one of the city's most expensive hotels, one of the corporation's assets, Liam tried to make small talk to distract Isadora. He talked about the clouds in the sky, about the passing cars, but his mind was in a whirlwind. He thought about the detectives, the questions he might face, the threat of losing the promotion that represented the pinnacle of his ambition, the recognition of his genius for generating profit and profitability. He had so much money, a fortune in dollars, a net worth built with cunning and investments in gold and crypto, but he felt poorer than ever. When they arrived, the hall was vibrant with the presence of the company's most important executives, all accompanied by their immaculate families. The ostentation was palpable: sparkling jewelry, bespoke suits, controlled laughter. Liam held Isadora's hand tightly, feeling her small, sweaty palm in his. His colleagues' eyes fixed on them, some with genuine curiosity, others with poorly disguised skepticism. He could feel the whispers, the unasked questions, the assessing glances. So this is Liam Miller's daughter, they seemed to say, the one who appeared out of nowhere. He introduced Isadora to some of his colleagues, and she, to his surprise and relief, played her part with surprising grace. She smiled at the right times, nodded her head, and even snuggled up to him when a particularly nosy colleague asked about their father-daughter relationship. "She's a sweetheart," Liam said, forcing a smile. And the relief he felt seeing the charade hold was almost dizzying. The dividends of his courage, he thought ironically, were being paid in moments of panic. Then came the moment to meet the CEO, the man whose judgment would determine his future. Mr. Thompson was an imposing man, with a penetrating gaze that seemed capable of seeing through any lie. He smiled warmly at Liam, but his eyes settled on Isadora. "Liam, my boy, so good to see your family here. And this must be your charming daughter." He knelt to speak to Isadora, and Liam felt his heart race. Isadora hesitated for a second, her eyes searching for Liam's. He gave an imperceptible nod, and she composed herself. "Hello, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice a little shy but clear. "I'm Isadora." The CEO was enchanted. He spoke with her for a few minutes, asking about school and her favorite toys. Isadora, surprisingly, answered with a mix of naivety and wisdom that disarmed the powerful executive. She told him about the doll Liam had bought her, about the cartoons they were watching, all with a touch of truth that Liam could never have taught. He, who had amassed a fortune in capital and financial applications, watched in amazement at the girl's spontaneous performance. The ceremony continued, and Liam was promoted to managing partner. He felt a wave of triumph, but also a strange emptiness. He had done it. The charade had worked. He was at the peak of his career, and his already massive net worth was about to grow even larger, with the promise of greater profits and an enviable cash flow. He had fooled everyone, and the feeling was bittersweet. At the end of the night, as Liam prepared to leave, Mr. Thompson approached him again, a genuine smile on his face. "Liam," he said, "your daughter is a gem. I was very impressed with her. I'm sure she'll bring a lot of joy to your life." Liam murmured a thank you, trying to sound modest. "You know," the CEO continued, a twinkle in his eye, "I'd very much like to get to know this family of yours better. How about we schedule some regular visits to the office? I want to follow little Isadora's development. I'm sure she has a bright future ahead of her." Mr. Thompson's voice, once a sign of victory, now sounded like that of an executioner, and Liam felt cold sweat trickle down his back. The charade hadn't ended, it was just beginning, and now, with the CEO's intention to closely monitor the family, the danger of being discovered increased exponentially with every step. Mr. Thompson's smile, once a balm for Liam's ego, now seemed like a harbinger of disaster. The promotion he had coveted so much, which further solidified his vast net worth and fortune in capital, had been won. The congratulations, the handshakes, and the compliments on his performance and the beauty of his family echoed in his ears. But each word was a reminder of the precipice on which he stood. His ambition, his desire to climb even higher in the world of business and high profitability, had led him to a point of no return. He had more money than he had ever dreamed of, a cash flow that surpassed most large companies, but inner peace was far away. On the way back to the penthouse, the silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. Isadora slept in the back seat, exhausted, her small hand still clutching the doll Liam had bought her. Liam watched her in the rearview mirror, and the image of the innocent, vulnerable girl mixed with the anxiety gnawing at his chest. The CEO's regular visits to follow Isadora's development were a sword hanging over his head. How could he maintain the charade under such constant scrutiny? What would he do if Isadora, in a moment of carelessness or a return to her fears of abandonment, revealed the truth? The night was long and restless. Liam couldn't sleep, his thoughts spinning in his mind like a hurricane. He had risked everything: his career, his image, his reputation in the world of investments and the stock market. His fortune in dollars seemed worthless in the face of the impending collapse of his lie. He tried to plan, to anticipate, but the unpredictability of a child and the shrewdness of a CEO were variables he couldn't control with spreadsheets or profitability charts. The next morning, Liam asked Isadora a series of questions about Mr. Thompson, trying to understand what the girl had said, how she had reacted. Isadora, with her childlike sincerity, recounted every detail, every smile or every word. She didn't seem to grasp the gravity of the situation, only the relief of having played her part well, securing a few more days of safety and comfort in her life. The promise not to hurt her seemed easier to keep, but the promise not to abandon her with the new pressures was becoming more and more of a dilemma. The need to deepen Isadora's story, to create a credible past for the charade, became urgent. Liam knew he needed more details, something that could sustain the lie. When Mr. Thompson started asking more specific questions, he couldn't just say she appeared. He needed a narrative, a history that would justify the sudden arrival of his daughter. Using his contacts and a portion of his vast capital, he tasked a small, discreet investigation firm with gathering information on local group homes, looking for one Isadora could have run away from to justify her arrival. The investigators were efficient. Within a few days, Liam received a discreet envelope. Inside were documents about Isadora, not just about the group home she had fled, but something more. There was a birth certificate, old and yellowed, with Isadora's full name, Isadora Helena Santiago, and next to the mother's name, Liam felt the world spin, Helena Santiago. The name hit him with the force of a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of him. Helena. Liam knew her. He'd had a brief, intense relationship with her years ago in college, before his obsession with money and the business world took over his life, before he became a multi-millionaire focused solely on his assets. He had abandoned her abruptly and cruelly when she got pregnant, denying paternity and disappearing completely from her life. Back then, he had no room for a family, only for building his empire, for accumulating profit and dividends. He had invested all his focus in his career, leaving his personal life behind. The pages of the documents seemed to dance before his eyes. There it was, in official script, Helena's name as the mother, and the father's field was blank. A void he had created. The air grew thin in his lungs, and he felt a cold sweat run down his spine. The irony was cruel, almost sadistic. He had paid his own daughter to pretend to be his daughter, The charade he had orchestrated to save his career was about to unfold into a much deeper and more devastating revelation, one that threatened to expose not only the lie about the promotion, but the lie of his entire life. Mr. Thompson, the visits, the envious colleagues, all of it seemed small compared to the mountain that had just risen before him. He, the magnate of gold and cryptocurrency, the lord of a gigantic net worth, was facing the largest and most painful bill of all. Liam's world, built on foundations of money, fortune, and a vast net worth, crumbled in an instant with the discovery of that document. Helena. The name echoed in his mind, a ghost from a past he had tried to bury under piles of dollars, under the facade of unshakable success on the stock market. He felt like a fraud, not just for his current charade, but for his entire life, for the way he had neglected human bonds in his insatiable pursuit of capital and profit. The image of Isadora, alone and hungry on the streets, now mingled with the memory of Helena, pregnant and abandoned, and the pain he had caused seemed to materialize into a crushing weight on his chest. He reread the birth certificate of Isadora Helena Santiago again and again, each word a blow, each syllable a reminder of his youthful cruelty. The blank father field was a silent testament to his cowardice. At that time, Liam's focus was solely on his business, on accumulating assets, on watching his income grow. The idea of having a child, a responsibility that would demand time and detract from his ambition, was something he simply couldn't or wouldn't conceive of. He had been a potential young billionaire, but with an appalling emotional poverty. The second major twist came in the form of a DNA test. With a racing heart and trembling hands, Liam secretly requested the test, using samples from Isadora obtained discreetly. The days of waiting were torture, each minute dragging on with the agony of uncertainty and guilt. When the results arrived, they only confirmed what his gut had been screaming. He was, indeed, Isadora's biological father. The charade was revealed to be a cruel reunion of fate. He was literally paying his own daughter to pretend to be his daughter. What had seemed like a solution to a social status problem, an image issue to keep his cash flow rising, had turned into the deepest of all truths. The additional information the investigation agency had collected on Helena was equally devastating. After being abandoned, she had struggled to raise Isadora alone amidst financial and emotional hardship. She never sought him out, never tried to force him to accept paternity, leading a quiet, dignified life despite all the adversity. The sadness was palpable between the lines of the report. Helena had recently passed away from a sudden illness, leaving Isadora completely orphaned and, eventually, on the streets. Liam felt a tightness in his chest, a sharp pain, a remorse that seemed to consume his soul. He had taken the life of his daughter's mother, not with a crime, but with an indifference that was just as destructive. The gravity of his decision, of his cowardice from so many years ago, hit him with full force. All his riches, all his investments in gold and cryptocurrency, all the profit and profitability he had generated seemed insignificant compared to the irretrievable loss Isadora had suffered because of him. He had neglected the true fortune life had tried to give him, trading it for a world of numbers and financial transactions. While Liam tried to process these revelations, time continued to tick by, and with it, the threat of discovery became more imminent. Mr. Thompson had made his first courtesy visit to the office, gifting Isadora a drawing set and chatting with her about her hobbies, her friends, and her life at home. Isadora, to Liam's surprise, had performed brilliantly, responding with the innocence and charm he had so meticulously rehearsed, but which now seemed so false. But the charade was about to implode from the inside out. One day, Isadora, in a moment of childish curiosity, rummaged through the papers Liam had left on the living room coffee table. the investigation reports, the birth documents, the DNA test results. Liam was in his home office, immersed in spreadsheets and phone calls about the profitability of his funds, when he heard a sharp scream from the living room. He ran out, his heart pounding. Isadora was standing in the middle of the room, the papers scattered at her feet, her eyes wide with horror and betrayal. She looked at him, not with the affection she had rehearsed, but with an indescribable fury and pain. Tears streamed down her face, washing away the grime and revealing a completely desolate child. You're my dad," she screamed, her voice choked with sobs. "My real dad, and you left me. And now you're paying me to be your fake daughter." Liam felt the blood run cold in his veins. The third obstacle had appeared, and it was the most overwhelming of all. The girl, discovering the truth, felt doubly betrayed. First by being abandoned by her real father, then by being hired by the same man who had rejected her. The pain in her eyes was a mirror of the pain Liam finally felt. He tried to approach her, but she backed away as if he were a monster. "No! Don't touch me!" she yelled, her voice filled with desperation. "I'm going to tell everyone. I'll tell them you're a liar, that you abandoned me." Her words, like sharp daggers, struck Liam's heart. The fourth obstacle emerged, even more terrifying. Isadora was threatening to expose the entire fraud, destroying not only his career, his business, his name, his vast capital, and everything he had built, but also any chance of reconciliation, any possibility of building a real family with the daughter he had ignored for so long. The image of Mr. Thompson, with his benevolent smile and growing curiosity, flashed through his mind. The end was near, and this time there was no money, no gold, no cryptocurrency, not all the fortune in the world that could save him. Isadora's scream echoed through the luxurious penthouse, a shrill sound that tore through the opulent silence and wounded Liam's soul more deeply than any financial crisis ever had. The little girl, with the documents scattered at her feet, looked at him with a pain and revulsion so intense that Liam felt the air thin in his lungs. His fortune, his net worth in dollars, all the capital he had masterfully accumulated in business, suddenly seemed like a pile of insignificant trash. The raw, naked truth had been exposed, not by a detective or an envious colleague, but by his own daughter, whom he had abandoned and then hired. "Isadora, please, listen to me," Liam begged, reaching out a hand. But she recoiled as if he were a palpable threat. Her eyes, once so full of the precocious wisdom of the streets, were now red and swollen, overflowing with childish rage and an unbearable sense of betrayal. "No, I don't want to listen to you. You're a fake dad." Her words were like hammer blows to his heart, each one more painful than the last. He felt the floor disappear from under him. The image of the great businessman, the multi-millionaire who dominated the stock market, disintegrated before the purely wounded innocence of his daughter. Liam tried to approach again, kneeling to be at her level. "Isadora, I know I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake. But please, let me explain. I didn't know you were my daughter. I swear I didn't know." The lie was fragile, almost unnecessary now, but he uttered it in a desperate panic. He wanted to fix this, but he didn't know how. All his knowledge about fund profitability and long-term investment strategies was useless at this moment. The girl, however, wasn't listening. She was in her own world of pain, a whirlwind of emotions. She snatched one of the documents from the floor, crumpling it in her small hand. "You only wanted me for your stupid game, to make money, to get your promotion." She threw the paper at him, tears streaming uncontrollably. The following weeks, the fourth and fifth weeks of what was supposed to be a charade, turned into an emotional battlefield inside Liam's penthouse. Isadora oscillated between fits of rage and moments of a dark, cutting silence. She refused to call him Dad outside the presence of others, and the charade for Mr. Thompson and Liam's colleagues became an act of emotional tightrope walking. Every visit from the CEO, every company social event, was a test of Liam's resilience and Isadora's ability to maintain the pose, even with the pain and anger simmering inside her. Liam, for his part, was a wreck. Guilt gnawed at him from the inside, a slow poison that prevented him from enjoying his fortune, his profits, his supposed triumph. The ambition that once drove him relentlessly toward new investments and financial applications now felt empty. He tried everything to redeem himself with Isadora, buying her more toys, taking her to amusement parks, dedicating his time and attention to her, something he had never done with his capital. He listened to her, truly listened, to her stories about the streets, about the group home, about her fears and dreams. He noticed the small gestures of trust she occasionally granted him, a softer glance, a light touch of her hand. But the wall of betrayal he had built between them was high and strong. The fear of Isadora exposing him was a constant threat, a fourth obstacle that manifested in every penetrating stare from a colleague, in every question about his family history that Mr. Thompson asked with growing curiosity. Liam knew his rivals were closing in, waiting for the right moment to bring him down. He noticed the heightened surveillance, the buzz of gossip among his team, the looks of suspicion about his newfound wealth. The interest and dividends he had earned were not enough to calm the storm. One day, during an important business lunch with Mr. Thompson and other directors at the city's most exclusive club, Liam felt a chill run down his spine. Isadora, sitting at the table beside him, was playing with her food, but her eyes were fixed on her father. He sensed she was in one of her moments of silent anger, and a cold panic began to grip him. He tried to signal her, a discreet warning, but it was too late. Suddenly, Isadora dropped her fork with a loud clink that drew everyone's attention. "Daddy," she said, her voice surprisingly clear, "you wouldn't leave me again, would you?" Liam felt the blood drain from his face. The silence at the table was deafening, all eyes fixed on him, awaiting his response. Mr. Thompson tilted his head, a line of concern on his forehead. Liam knew that a single mistake could destroy everything, not just his promotion and his vast capital, but the fragile trust he was trying to rebuild with Isadora. What would he say? He knew he was facing an impossible choice, a choice that could cost him everything. And there was no money, no gold, no cryptocurrency that could get him out of this. The bomb was set, and the clock was ticking. The silence at the lunch table was so thick, Liam could hear the frantic pounding of his own heart. The eyes of everyone present, from the powerful Mr. Thompson to the junior directors, were fixed on him. Isadora's question, so innocent in its phrasing, was a dagger plunged into his charade, his net worth, his very identity. Liam felt cold sweat trickle down his back, a chill running down his spine. He, the shrewd businessman who had amassed a fortune in cash and stock market investments, was utterly speechless. Without a plan, without an escape route, he looked at Isadora, and in her eyes he saw the pain, the anger, but also a faint glimmer of hope. She was giving him a chance, one last shot at redemption, and he knew he couldn't waste it. Not with Mr. Thompson watching, not with the whole world watching, but most of all, not with his own daughter. "No, Isadora," he said, his voice a bit hoarse but firm, echoing through the dining room. "I would never leave you again, never." The words, simple in their formulation, carried a weight of truth that surprised everyone at the table, including Liam himself. He spoke them not as part of the charade, but as a genuine promise, coming from a place in his heart he had kept locked for years. Mr. Thompson watched the scene with growing curiosity, a line of interest creasing his forehead. Isadora, for her part, lowered her eyes, but Liam noticed a slight relaxation in her shoulders, a subtle sign that his words had reached her. The meal continued in a tense atmosphere, but Liam felt a shift within himself. The mask of ambition and coldness he had worn for so long began to crack. He looked at the directors, at their immaculate wives, at their own lives of ostentation and relentless pursuit of more profits and dividends. The promise of a family, of a child's love, seemed more valuable than all the gold, all the Bitcoin, all the capital he had ever accumulated. That same week, the third and most devastating major twist manifested dramatically during a crucial corporate meeting where Liam was about to present an ambitious expansion plan that would guarantee even greater profitability and an enviable cash flow for the company. The boardroom door burst open. Isadora ran in, her eyes red and swollen, tears streaming down her face. She was in one of her moments of despair, where the fear of abandonment and anger at his betrayal overrode any attempt at control. "You're a fake dad," she screamed, her small voice filled with an uncontrollable fury, echoing off the boardroom walls. The executives, shocked, stared at Liam, whose eyes widened in horror. Mr. Thompson, standing beside him, stared in disbelief. "You left me when I was a baby, and now you're using me to make money." The words, cruel and painful, were delivered with the pure, unfiltered honesty of a wounded child, and they struck Liam like a bolt of lightning. The air in the room turned frigid, and all eyes fixed on him, not with curiosity, but with shock and accusation. Liam felt his world collapse, his image, his status, his vast net worth, his career. Everything was in ruins. The charade had been exposed publicly and irrevocably, not by a detective, but by his own daughter. He didn't try to deny it, didn't try to justify himself. He just looked at Isadora, his heart torn by the pain she was feeling and the pain he had caused. He knew what she was saying was the truth, his truth. The directors muttered among themselves, whispers of fraud and liar hanging in the air. Mr. Thompson, visibly shaken, looked at Liam with an expression of disappointment that was more painful than any reprimand. Liam knew his empire, his ambition, his assets, everything he had worked so hard for had come to an end. Isadora continued to scream, the pain and rage spilling out in her words, and Liam just watched her, paralyzed. He didn't know what to do, what to say. He scooped her up into his arms, and she struggled, crying, but he held her tight, hugging her with the force of a love he was only now beginning to recognize. He carried her out of the boardroom, leaving behind the stunned directors and the shocked Mr. Thompson. The fall of Liam Miller was swift and brutal. The news of the fake daughter and the public confession of abandonment spread like wildfire through the company and the media. He became the center of a scandal that threatened to destroy not only his career, but his reputation in the investment market. Newspapers ran headlines about the multi-millionaire who used his own daughter to get ahead, and his image as a business genius, a rising billionaire, crumbled in the blink of an eye. The company's lawyers contacted him. Shareholders were in an uproar, and the company's assets seemed to be at risk. Liam found himself alone in his luxurious penthouse, the silence more oppressive than ever. The phone rang incessantly, but he didn't answer. The only person in his life now was Isadora, who, after her outburst at the meeting, had retreated back into her silence, an impenetrable barrier of pain. He watched her play with her doll in a corner of the room, her eyes distant, and knew that the real battle was yet to come. Not the battle for his career or his fortune, but the battle for the forgiveness and trust of his daughter. The battle for the soul of the family he barely knew he had. He was at rock bottom, and what came next was a mystery. He didn't know if he could get back up, or if Isadora would ever forgive him. The air in Liam's penthouse, once filled with the scent of success and wealth, now carried the heavy smell of scandal and regret. The newspaper headlines, which had once celebrated his achievements in the stock market and his growing fortune, now branded him the multi-millionaire fraud. his vast net worth, his investments in gold and crypto, his capital in dollars, it all seemed to have lost its luster, tarnished by the shadow of his own hypocrisy. The public humiliation was a slow, relentless burn that consumed what was left of his pride. Isadora, after her explosion at the meeting, had withdrawn into a silent state. She would spend hours sitting in a corner of the room, hugging her doll, her eyes distant and filled with a sadness that tore at Liam's heart. He tried to talk to her, told her stories, read her books, offered to play games, but she responded with monosyllables or with silence. The barrier between them was now higher and more insurmountable than ever. The mistrust and pain of betrayal had solidified in her small heart, and Liam felt powerless to break it. His girlfriend, Valerie, who had valued status above all else, couldn't stomach the scandal. With a look of contempt and cutting words, she left him, taking with her what was left of her own ambition and the illusion of a future of power and influence. "I can't be with someone who's a fraud, Liam," she said, and her departure was a quiet relief for Liam, as the lie that had bound them had become unsustainable. For her, Liam's money and capital were no longer enough to compensate for the public shame. The company's internal investigation was ruthless. Lawyers and directors took turns interrogating him, trying to understand the extent of the charade and the damage it could cause to the company's reputation and the profitability of its funds. Liam didn't try to deny it. He chose complete vulnerability. In a moment of courage he didn't know he possessed, he publicly confessed not only the initial lie about having a daughter, but the entire story, the abandonment of Helena, the reunion with Isadora, the desperation that led him to hire her. He spoke of his unbridled ambition, the loneliness that consumed him, the relentless pursuit of a status he thought would complete him. He opened his heart and soul, revealing the scars of a life dedicated to business and the accumulation of assets. The confession was painful, humiliating, but also cathartic. He felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a burden he had carried for years. Mr. Thompson, present at the confession, listened with a complex expression, a mixture of disappointment and, perhaps, a touch of understanding. He saw a man who, despite all his wealth and his empire, was now stripped of everything but the truth. The market reacted with turbulence, and the company's stock took a temporary dip, but Liam's honesty resonated in an unexpected way. Liam knew his career as he knew it was over. He had lost the promotion, his name was tarnished, and his future with the company was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had lost what he thought he wanted, only to perhaps find what he truly needed. In an act of deep reflection, he voluntarily resigned from the promotion. He sent an email to all employees, confessing his guilt and expressing his profound remorse. He announced he would dedicate himself entirely to earning the forgiveness and trust of his daughter. The decision shocked everyone, from the shareholders who tracked his profits and dividends to the colleagues who envied him. The potential billionaire had transformed into a man seeking redemption. The first victory, small but significant, came a few days later. Liam was sitting in the living room, watching Isadora play when she approached him. Are you going to let me stay here, Dad?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Liam felt a lump in his throat. "Well, yes, Isadora. You can stay as long as you want. This is your home if you want it to be." She looked at him with her brown eyes, and for the first time in weeks, he saw a glimmer of hope in them. I want to stay. For now." Those words were a balm to his soul. It was a truce, a beginning, a chance. He had lost his girlfriend. He was facing public scandal. But he had gained an opportunity, the chance to be a father, to build a real family. He felt the weight of responsibility, but it was a weight he embraced, not with fear, but with a renewed determination. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but Liam knew he was no longer alone. He had Isadora, and for her, he would fight. The next battle would be in court, and he knew it would be the final test of his transformation. Liam's resignation from the promotion and his public confession were like an earthquake in the corporate world. The scandal reverberated not only on the stock exchanges, where his company's shares took a momentary hit, but also in the media, which reveled in the fall of the multimillionaire. His vast net worth, once a source of admiration, was now associated with fraud and abandonment. He, who had built a business empire on cold calculation, now found himself in a new kind of arena, where capital and profits were not the currency. The days that followed were devoted entirely to Isadora. Liam had transformed his luxurious penthouse into a home for the girl, filling it with toys, books, and most importantly, his constant presence. He took her for walks in the park, cooked for her with mixed results, to her delight, and spent hours just listening to her talk about her memories of the streets, the group home, her fears, and her small dreams. He was determined to build a bridge of trust, brick by brick, across the chasm he himself had created between them. His fortune, once used to accumulate more assets, was now employed to provide security and comfort for his daughter. Despite all his attempts, Isadora still carried the pain of betrayal. There were moments when she would shut down, her eyes distant, and Liam would feel the frustration and guilt all over again. "You're going to leave me again, aren't you?" she asked one day, as he helped her build a castle out of blocks. Her voice was a whisper, but the words were like a punch to Liam's gut. "Never, Isadora," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. "I promise you, I will never leave you again. I'm your father, and fathers don't abandon their children." He hugged her, feeling her tiny body relax a little in his arms. It was small progress, but to Liam, it meant the world. The legal battle for Isadora's custody began, and Liam faced a series of obstacles. As a father who had abandoned his daughter and then hired her for a charade, his reputation was in tatters. The state's attorneys, representing the girl's interests, were skeptical. They questioned his motives, his ability to be a father, his life story of unbridled ambition, and the pursuit of wealth in dollars. He had to present his vast net worth and cash flow to prove he could provide for her. But he knew money alone would not be enough. He found himself in a courtroom, the place where justice was supposedly impartial, but where his story was told through cold documents and impersonal accusations. He had to prove not only that he was financially capable of providing for Isadora, but that he had changed, that his transformation was genuine. He spoke of his ambition, his mistakes, the loneliness that had consumed him, and the discovery that true fortune was not in investments, gold, or crypto, but in unconditional love. The moment of greatest tension occurred during Isadora's testimony. The girl, at 7 years old, took the stand, her small figure almost swallowed by the formal environment of the courtroom. Liam felt his heart in his throat. He knew that what she would say there would determine his fate, the fate of the family he was fighting to build. He watched her, trying to convey his love and regret through his gaze. The state's attorney began questioning Isadora, asking about her life on the streets, the group home, and finally, about Liam. The questions were direct, designed to extract any sign of hesitation or fear. "Isadora," the attorney asked, "do you trust Mr. Miller? Do you want to live with him?" Isadora looked at Liam, her brown eyes meeting his. Liam felt the weight of the moment, the emotional climax of his entire journey. Her answer would seal his fate. The decision, worth more than all his capital and assets combined, was in the hands of a child. Liam held his breath, waiting for the verdict. The silence in the room was deafening, and their future hung in the balance, fragile and uncertain. Isadora's next word would be the turning point, the moment that would define whether he would have a family or be condemned to eternal loneliness. Despite all his wealth, The courtroom was silent, a heavy, expectant silence that seemed to amplify every beat of Liam's heart. Little Isadora, on the stand, seemed even smaller before the imposing judge and the fixed gazes of the lawyers and Liam himself. The state attorney's question echoed in the air. "Isadora, do you trust Mr. Miller? Do you want to live with him?" Her answer was the verdict, the crucial point that would decide both their fates. For Liam, the outcome of that testimony was worth more than any profit, any dividend, any fluctuation on the stock market. Isadora looked at Liam, and Liam felt completely exposed, his soul stripped of all layers of ambition and wealth. He looked back at her, trying to convey all the love and regret he felt, the entire promise of never abandoning her again. Little Isadora took a deep breath, and in her brown eyes, Liam saw a mixture of feelings. The fear still present, the memory of pain, but also a glimmer of something new, something he had fought so hard to awaken. "Yes," she said, her voice small but clear and firm, echoing through the room. "I trust Daddy Liam." A collective, almost imperceptible sigh of relief swept through the room. "And yes, I want to live with him." Liam felt tears well up in his eyes. Those words, spoken by his daughter, were worth more than his entire vast net worth, more than all his financial investments in gold, Bitcoin, and cryptocurrency. It was his first real victory, not a victory in the business world, but a victory of the soul, a redemption. The judge, with a small smile, observed the scene with a benevolence Liam had not expected. Isadora's testimony, marked by her sincerity and the vulnerability of a child choosing to trust, was the turning point in the case. She testified that, despite everything, Liam had shown a genuine change. "He taught me how to read," she said with a shy smile, "and he hugs me when I'm scared, and he promised he'll never leave me again." Her simple, truthful words touched the hearts of everyone in the room, showing a side of Liam the corporate world had never known. The resolution of the main conflicts began to unfold. The judge, impressed by Isadora's testimony and Liam's visible transformation, granted him temporary custody, on the condition that Liam undergo psychological and family counseling to ensure the girl's well-being. It was a victory, but one that came with the weight of responsibility and the need to continue proving his change. Liam hugged Isadora outside the courtroom, feeling her small body in his arms, and tears flowed freely down his face. "Thank you, Isadora," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving me a chance. I love you." "Dad," she replied, and those words were the most beautiful melody Liam had ever heard, worth more than all his profits and dividends. From that day on, Liam dedicated himself with even more fervor to building a home and a family for Isadora. He began family therapy sessions, learning to deal with his own emotions, his past of ambition and abandonment, and to build a healthy, trusting relationship with his daughter. He learned to prioritize, to put Isadora's well-being above all else, including his business and his fortune in capital. The characters' narrative arcs began to close. Liam, the man obsessed with status and money, was transforming into a loving and dedicated father. Isadora, the traumatized and distrustful street girl, began to blossom, opening up to the love and security that a home life could offer. Her fear of abandonment, though still present at times, gave way to a growing sense of belonging and unconditional love. Liam's transformation did not go unnoticed. Mr. Thompson, following Liam and Isadora's story from afar, sent him a message, not about business, but about family. "Liam," he wrote, "I'm impressed by your courage. All the money in the world can't buy what you're building now. You're on the right path." The words of the CEO, a man Liam had so admired for his fortune and power, now took on a new meaning. A meaning that went beyond interest rates, stocks, and profitability. Liam resolved his emotional conflicts in a satisfying and realistic way. He didn't become a saint overnight, but he was a man in constant evolution, learning to be a father, to love, to live a life he never imagined was possible. He understood that true wealth was not in his net worth, in his assets, but in the invisible bonds that held a family together, in the simple moments of joy, in the tight hugs, in the words of love. He had lost his high-flying career and his girlfriend, but he had gained something infinitely more valuable, his daughter and his own heart. He felt, for the first time, truly complete. The story of Liam Miller was no longer about a rising billionaire, but about a father in redemption, and the emotional climax had passed, leaving a trail of hope and love. 6 weeks had passed since that desperate morning when the aroma of expensive coffee mingled with the cold sweat of desperation in Liam's penthouse. The executive who was once obsessed with social status, the accumulation of fortune, and the incessant growth of his capital now woke up with an entirely new purpose. His wealth in dollars, his vast net worth built with shrewd business acumen and stock market investments, now served a higher purpose: to sustain and nurture the home he had found, not built. The penthouse, once a symbol of his gilded loneliness, had transformed into a vibrant, welcoming home. The expensive art and minimalist design objects now coexisted with colorful drawings taped to the refrigerator and toys scattered across the living room floor. Liam, who once dedicated himself to analyzing profitability and cash flow, now spent his mornings making Isadora's favorite breakfast, and his afternoons were filled with homework, trips to the park, and bedtime stories. He had found a kind of wealth that no gold, no cryptocurrency, no financial application could ever buy. The official legal adoption of Isadora was the crowning achievement of his journey of redemption. In court, Isadora, with a radiant smile and eyes full of love, testified again, this time with even greater conviction. "But I want to be Daddy Liam's daughter," she said, and her words were the final seal on a bond that life, in its own twisted way, had forged. The judge, moved, granted the adoption, and Liam felt a wave of emotion that surpassed any corporate triumph he had ever experienced. He was finally a father. The final victory brought not only the formation of a real family, but his complete personal transformation. Liam discovered that being a true father was worth more than any corporate promotion, more than any increase in his net worth or his dividends. A child's love was the only wealth that truly mattered, the only source of joy and fulfillment he had ever sought. He had given up his corporate empire, his multi-millionaire status, but he had gained an invaluable treasure: his daughter and his own soul. He and Isadora began to build simple family traditions: movie nights with popcorn, Saturday mornings with pancakes, visits to the library where Isadora eagerly picked out books. Liam, who once worried about profit projections and the interest on his investments, now delighted in the sound of Isadora's laughter, the sparkle in her eyes, the warmth of her small hands in his. Isadora's fear of abandonment gradually dissipated, replaced by an unshakable security in her father's love. She had found a safe harbor, a home, a family. The corporate office, which once represented only ambition and status, now had pictures of Isadora on Liam's desk, not as a prop to impress colleagues or maintain a charade, but as a daily reminder that some of life's greatest victories come disguised as apparent failures, and that sometimes we need to lose everything we think we want to find everything we truly need. The girl who arrived as a hired actress turned out to be the greatest treasure of his life, not because she helped him get a promotion, but because she taught him the true meaning of family, love, and redemption. Liam's life was no longer about numbers and financial transactions, but about moments, about connections, about the unconditional love he had found in his daughter. The story of Liam Miller was a testament that true fortune lies in what cannot be bought, in what is built with love, compassion, and honesty. He had traded a life of superficiality for a life of meaning, and that was the greatest return he could have ever hoped for.